Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for watching. Our episode today is brought to you by... I'm just kidding. I don't have any sponsors. Ah, ha, ha, that was funny, right? We have with us today Jessica. That laughing can stop now. Okay, that was nice. Jessica, and so how can... just start by telling us a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What do you like?
Well, I am from Maryland, just outside the D.C. area, and I am primarily a historical fiction writer, though I sort of dabble across genres. I have a book coming out soon that is sort of romance meets mystery meets history, so all that sort of fun. But I'm a history nerd and proud of it.
Okay, awesome. So, touching on that point of being a history nerd, when did you start to fall in love with history? Was it like high school? I mean,
I have always just found history fascinating. Where some of the earliest books actually I remember reading are like the American Girl series, like the early reader little kids books like that, and just I've always found how people are so different and yet still people throughout just pretty much any era fascinating. And so at one point I was considering majoring in history. I didn't end up, I had a teacher talk me out of that one. But I am still, like I said, very interested, and I've managed to sort of parlay it into my own writing career.
Okay, awesome. So how long would you say that you've been writing for?
I mean, I've been dabbling since I was little, where I was one of those like 8-year-olds where it's like, there was a buddy and he really liked to go to the store. But I finished my first novel in high school. And that one is buried deep on my hard drive forever. It's honestly Harry Potter fan fiction light, where it's like it's not fan fiction, but it's a bunch of magical kids at a magical school that's totally not Hogwarts. Sort of stuff.
And have you shared it with anybody, though?
I know that I have college friends who've looked at it.
Would J.K. Rowling sue you if she saw it?
I don't think she could sue me in the same way that Stephanie Myers can't sue E.L. James, or it's just enough difference that it would not
Nice.
be technically fan fiction. But yeah, where it was my baby for a long, long time, and like part of me still very much loves it, even though I know it's a train wreck at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that was my first like really serious foray into like, I'm an author, was high school.
Mm-hmm. And how many pages or words would you say that is?
Oof, that one I think for its first draft was like 300,000 words or something, like way too long for a novel. But
I don't know if I've written that much in my life.
Well, and it's funny because these days I'm really more of an underwriter. Like my first drafts come in really short, and then I have to fluff them up. But I mean, it was also very symptomatic of the fact that I didn't know what I was doing, where it was one of those like, I don't know what they should do right now. Let's just have a conversation about this band because I like this band. We're going to talk about them. And so there was a lot of stuff where all these scenes start with them waking up because I didn't know how to start a scene otherwise, and those sort of things. So a lot of it, I'm sure, the actual content is probably like 1/3 of what is actually written from that time.
So you mentioned a couple things like, not knowing how to start out a scene and that sort of stuff. What would you say are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from your past writing, as well as how has your style changed since then?
My style has changed quite a bit, which I mean, I think is understandable. It's been nearly 20 years. And I mean, I don't even really write in that genre anymore, where, as I said, I have a piece coming out that's sort of split genre that has a little bit of that paranormal darkness to it, but for the most part, I'm not writing fantasy so much these days anyway. Um, but I've loved just the entire process of learning where I'm primarily self-taught outside of um, where I mean like watching like masterclass stuff or YouTube or those sort of things. But and I've worked at different publishers, which of course have helped a lot. But I sort of like came in sideways to my writing career is how I always talk about it. Where, um, like I said, I wrote the novel in high school. I dabbled. My friend started my school's creative writing club, and so she dragged me into that. And so I had my little band of high school writer friends. Um, but I always thought I was going to be a lawyer. Like that was just sort of what was in my head of what I was going to do.
You seem too nice to be a
And
lawyer.
yeah, and it was a solid career, good money. I was that kid who was like a sophomore in high school where I was like, okay, so my 10-year plan, I'm going to go to this school, I'm going to go to law school, I'm going to do this. And then junior year of college, I needed to earn some money. And so I was like, oh, I like writing. Let's look at this site that has different jobs that are like book related. And ended up interning, a paid internship, which was nice, interning for a small publisher. And that pretty much just like right hooked my entire life where I learned so much about, I was in acquisitions for a large part of it, which is reading what is commonly known as the slush file by a lot of people in the industry, where it's people sending in their manuscripts with or query letters and all those sort of things. And so just working with that and seeing what publishers are interested in and how they look at writing, and it was just such an interesting eye-opening going from this sort of like hobby, it's an art thing, to okay, this is how the business side is done.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm actually fascinated about that whole side of it. I had no clue that you were involved in the publishing industry, so this is kind of like, I'm excited to keep talking about this. Maybe we can get into that a little bit further, a little bit more down the line. But let's go back a little bit to how you were saying you wrote fan fiction. What would you say some of your favorite books are, and how do you draw inspiration for them in your own writing?
A lot of my still favorite books are similar to what I'm writing these days, where I really like the more female-focused historical fiction, the Philippa Gregory sort of writing. I have some
let's pause there for a second. When you say you really like female-focused, what about female-focused works really draws you in? Do you like a quote-unquote strong female character, or do you like drama, or do you like writing women because you are in the head of a woman and a lot of us males cannot write women well? What about that do you like?
I think it's just going back to that entire idea of how people are so different and yet the same, where obviously we live in a society that is shaped from the past, where there are still things that people are dealing with that maybe have not changed as much as some would like and all those other things. But it's also this idea of how society like shapes you in a way, where one of my books, The Stars of Heaven, sort of follows these, like the themes of someone learning to question the society that they were raised in. And it's just really interesting to me to see how these ideas of how you function in society from like sort of a feminine perspective, where a lot of male-focused historical fiction I find is very military-focused a lot of the times, or those sort of books I see where what I write and what I'm interested in tends to be my husband is a historian, and he calls it cultural history, where it's more this how society functions, how day-to-day life functions, and how the society holds together, which I tend to find more in those sort of narratives.
So where would you say the conflict in your plot is generated from?
Well, for the Stars of Heaven, it takes place in 18th century Portugal. And I always joke that in Lisbon in 1755, there was a major earthquake, which is one of the most important, events of the era that nobody who hasn't read Candide knows about. And what basically happens then is that Portugal was still a very, very Catholic country where the Enlightenment's happening in the rest of Europe at that time. And Portugal's basically doubling down where it's like, all of you are heretics. We're just going to pump money into the Inquisition more. We are the good Catholic country. And all of a sudden this earthquake comes and basically just levels Lisbon, their capital. And there's different factions in the Portuguese court where there's people who have spent time abroad in England and France, and they're like, well, we're going to do the scientific study of, we don't think that this was God saying something. We think that there was a tremor and there's maybe fire under the earth. They were going very Aristotle about how earthquakes worked for them. And then, of course, there's the very religious faction. And so I took it from the point of view of a young woman who starts her life just knowing basically what she was raised with, where she's a good Catholic girl, was raised in a good Catholic family, and is thrown into this sort of questioning of what is real, what is the right way to live your life, those sort of things. And so you have a lot of this tension between no one quite knows the answers to these questions. How do you find your answers?
That's a really good plot point that you have there. I feel like that's something that everybody experiences in their life because nobody has the answers. And we all are kind of, in our own ways, we're shut in, or not really shut in, we're maybe sheltered from other families' ideas as we're raised by our own family or other religions' ideas and other political ideas and stuff. So it's a really good path that you're going down with that.
Yeah, and I wanted to... I always say that I didn't want it to come across as a religion bad or science bad sort of book where personally I'm agnostic, so I was joking that I don't have much skin in the game where I'm not coming at it as I'm trying to disprove religion or trying to build it up, but I wanted the themes to run through that it's more the unexamined life is not worth living, where it's, if you are at least approaching your views as something that you should think about, it's good. It's when you force everything else out to just believe X or Y because you believe X or Y is where you have problems.
Yeah. No, that's good. So I checked you out on Amazon. I saw a couple of your titles. How many books in general have you written?
Well, just having written, I've probably written 20 at this point. I think I have 9 published, if I have that right. Okay.
And are most of them in that kind of colonial period?
I jump around quite a bit based on whatever catches me. Where some of my earlier stuff when I was still writing fantasy was sort of historical fantasy, like the Italian Renaissance-y as their world building. But then, so Stars of Heaven is 18th century. I have a book called A Dangerous Beauty coming out next year, which is 17th century. I'm currently working on one that's set in World War One. I've dabbled in some Regency stuff, so it's basically if I feel like there's a good story there, I'm gonna jump to whatever.
But in general, most of it is historical fiction. You said you moved away from fantasy a bit?
Yeah, where I've mostly moved into historical fiction. I'm trying my hand at some historical romance, where I haven't actually published like just straight historical romance, but I thought I'd try it out. So, but yeah, most of it has some like at least a historical bent to it.
So I'm gonna take the offensive here for a little bit. I am a huge fantasy and science fiction, but fantasy buff. Why'd you move away from it? That breaks my heart.
I love fantasy too, where I'm like I have nothing against it. It's just I found that I was more interested in the people's stories than in the world building aspect, and I feel like, especially for commercial fantasy, a lot of commercial fantasy readers really love that like deep lore, George R. Martin, Tolkien sort of world building, and that's just not where my interests as a writer lie. Where I'll read it still, but I just I was joking with a friend that I was writing fantasy because I was scared of how much research just going straight historical fiction was going to take, and so I wasn't doing the world building there justice because I was more like, it's historically-ish writing. And so I was one of those, like, if I want to be really proud of what I'm writing, I think I just have to put in the work one way or the other, and the research is more interesting.
Well, so talking about research, how much research do you do for one of your novels, we'll just say, and then how often do you get letters from angry readers saying that you messed up a fact?
My research process that I've developed at this point is I try to read a comprehensive sort of book of the time period or the event or whatever it is, so that I have a good background on what's happening, where I'm not going to have a plot point where, oh, we can't do that because you said that they meet George Washington here, but it's in a letter that he's in Georgia. You can't do that. And so that way you don't have to like completely fight plot points. From there, I then start working on my first draft and do a lot of smaller research on the go, is how I put it, where it's like typing and you're like, oh, what kind of underwear are they putting on? I don't know. I have to look. Do they have underwear? And so that way you have sort of knowledge of the era that's going to keep you moving in the right direction, but you're not spending 5 years just doing research without writing the first word. And so that is the balance I've sort of struck. For the most part, thus far, I haven't gotten too many really picky stuff. Part of that is I also have a good editor through my publisher who can also point out anachronisms. And so I've slipped by that. I do say that I live in fear of someone telling me I've got the naming conventions of Stars of Heaven wrong. Because I spent so long trying to figure out because if you, on the Iberian Peninsula, you keep both your mother and your father's name. And so if you know, like, Spanish names, you have, like, your father's surname and your mother's surname hyphenated. And in Portuguese, you have the same thing, but it was mother's, then father's, up until a certain point when it flipped back around. And so all of a sudden, like, it's the Spanish conventions, but the Portuguese conventions. And I finally just had to go, okay, you know what? I'm going with mothers, then fathers. And I'm like, just watch down the line. Someone's going to come at me and be like, no, this is wrong for the time period. So,
I mean, to be fair, if you've done more than 5 minutes of research into the subject, you're more knowledgeable than 99% of the population. So,
well, you see, I just have to keep writing in time periods that people know less about. Because if you start straying into the stuff where people are experts, then you have.
Well, see, and that's why I like writing. I was going to say that's why I like writing, make-believe worlds, because I can just make it up, and if someone comes to me, I'm just like, no, that's the way it is, because that's what I said. So
There you go.
Yeah. So what makes your book, or books rather, unique compared to other writers of that genre? And I know you said you kind of have mixed blend of genres, but why are yours special?
Well, I mean, they're special because I wrote them. they're, um, I oh, One of my favorite things to do is try to find stories that don't have as much airplay. Where, like I said, the Lisbon earthquake is one that, at least in the U.S., you don't have a lot of um, knowledge about it. It was actually very hard to find research material that wasn't in Portuguese when I started writing it. It was, I guess, 8 years ago at this point. Um, and then my book coming out in 2023 is Colonial America, which of course is more well known, but it's Maryland in the 17th century, which doesn't get nearly as much airtime as, like, it's very overshadowed. St. Mary's City, which is like the first colonial settlement in Maryland,
I don't
is
even know
so
where Maryland is,
overshadowed.
to be honest. So,
Yeah, where Maryland is between Pennsylvania and Virginia, and
okay.
we get forgotten, and like Jamestown just entirely runs the narrative there. So again, it was finding these little stories where the St. Mary's book is based around what was the only battle of the English Civil War in the Americas, basically. And so, English Civil War, you have some books out there, but not as much as you have a bunch of Tudor books, you have a bunch of War of the Roses books. And then when it's in Maryland, and it's all these little stories that just are so interesting and have so much drama to them, and people don't really know about them. And I love bringing those stories sort of to people's consciousness.
Okay, awesome. I like it. So, a little bit more in line with your stories again, and we kind of touched on this already, but what are some of your themes, and why are they important to you?
Well, like I said, one of my I had a writing professor I knew once who made the point that all writers have one story that they're trying to tell throughout their body of work, and obviously you have a bunch of different plots, a bunch of different characters. There are themes that just speak to you and show up in a lot of your work. And one that always seems to come back to me are these ideas of philosophy and how you understand the world, and how other people view the world, and how you deal with people who have very different worldviews from you. And so you'll find a lot of those themes of where Stars of Heaven has the Enlightenment and the Inquisition, basically. Um, Dangerous Beauty in St. Mary's has a lot of conflict between, once again, like the Catholic landowners and more Protestant freemen. Um, and then I'm working on a piece that has two characters who are sort of then on the other side of Enlightenment and Romantics, which is going the next philosophy up. And so I find all of these ways of thinking really interesting. And so those sort of themes of how you understand the world and how your life shapes those views tends to pop up a lot.
I like that. I would say that I have very similar themes in my writing. In some of my books, I literally have characters experiencing this exact same event from two different perspectives, and then coming away with two very different experiences. And then they will say something about another character, and two or three people say something about a different character that are very counter, argumentative thoughts, basically. And it's like, the reader has to come up with their own idea of what's true and what's not. And it's very akin to real life because nothing is so cut and dry in real life. And so I really appreciate that theme.
Yeah, I think that's great also where you have, because I think that happens to all of us, where one thing can happen in a room with 5 people and you have 5 different accounts of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels very real in books when you have that happen too.
Awesome. So real quick, I know I told you it was going to be about 30 minutes. How are you on time? Can we just keep going or?
Yeah, I'm good for at least another 10, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll try and change direction now. So I'm excited to talk about how you've worked in the publishing industry. But first, what has your journey to publication been like? And have you done any self-publishing, or has it all been through publishers? And just spit it all at me.
I didn't do any self-publishing. Predominantly, when I was starting out, I didn't really know much about it. And then by the time I learned about it, I didn't have really the money to do it right, quote unquote. And so I stuck with traditional publishing. And I didn't I didn't have what I felt was the wherewithal to find an editor, find a designer, set up the marketing, and all those things that a publisher does for you. I did sort of work my way up through like the different ranks of publishers, if that makes sense, where like I started with very small indie publishers, then got some books out through a mid-list, and then one of my books coming out next year is through Entangled, which is distributed through Macmillan. So I finally worked all the way up to like names people actually recognize, even though, I mean, I've loved all of my publishers. I don't think I've had I don't have any complaints about any of my publishers. It's just sort of this like working the way through marketing departments is sort of how I feel like it worked out.
Uh-huh. So having seen the back end of it, you said you worked in acquisition. What are some of the major do's and don'ts for people submitting?
Well, the biggest thing is just knowing that publishers are business people, where your book is your baby, my books are my baby, and it is art, and you can have a reason that you did X, Y, and Z. The publisher reading it isn't reading it for, oh, I see this great artistic vision. It's, oh, this is really good writing, and I need to be able to sell it. Mm-hmm. And so it's this, and I mean, that's part of the issue with when you're submitting places in general is you have one view of your writing and your publisher is going to have another view. And so you need to come at it with I feel this way, but I understand this is what the publishers want. Am I okay making those changes? Where like a couple of my books have gotten what are called revise and resubmits, where you get I'm interested in this book, but sort of letter or a call, depending on who you're talking to. And a lot of times you get those if there's a major change that the publisher is going to want before they contract you. And it's like, so we really like this book, but we want you to change the entire ending or but this. And so you have to come at it with, what am I willing to change to make this commercial? What am I? No, this
with
is
your
not
artist
something.
Conviction.
Where it's like, sorry, no, I'm not changing this character. That's just a hard line. And so a lot of it is trying to shift from just being an artist to being an artist and a business person.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever lost out on any deals because of your convictions?
No, where I've been able to generally work with my editors, luckily, where I joke I'm not especially precious with a lot, where, I mean, yes, if you're entirely like changing a theme that's really important to me, I'd probably walk on the deal, but a lot of times it's been more like when you're writing more female-focused books, the romance comes up a lot based on what readers want. My publisher, for one of my books, made me put the two like main characters together where they didn't originally end up as a couple, but they're like, no, readers are really going to want this. And so I was like, okay, fine.
Mhm.
But yeah, I haven't come up against something that was I either felt strong enough to walk about or had an editor not be willing to work with me on something, luckily.
Mhm. And do you try and work directly with the publishers, or do you have an agent?
I've mostly just worked with publishers, partially because starting with the smaller indie and mid-list ones, you can generally submit right to them. And then with my newest book, I actually connected with the editor through HitMad, which is a Twitter pitch contest. And so I sort of got to slide in under the bar that, because the main reason that you need an agent, of course, is because a lot of the big publishers don't deal directly with authors just because they get swamped. Where even I worked at a smaller press and we still got probably 1,000 submissions a month, and we were tiny.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm sure if you get up to all the imprints of Pinguin Random House and all those, if it was open season, they just never would get through all the submissions because there's
Yeah.
a million people out there who want to be writers easily,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah, they're definitely like the gatekeepers I've found, and though I will say I'm technically unpublished, but I feel like an agent could probably make you a little bit better of a deal maybe than you know how to make yourself because they know the industry and expectations and stuff. But do you have anything to say about that?
Yes, if you don't know the industry, I would say you likely want an agent or an entertainment lawyer of some kind, where you can go to agents on the back end as well if you have a deal that you'll probably not get a big agent by going, hey, Joe Publisher over here wants my book and doesn't have any advance or anything like that. But if you have a contract that you're looking at that has at least a bit of an advance and from a well enough known publisher, you can go. You can send a query letter that's like offer on blah 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 and be like, will you represent me for this offer I already have? Which I mean, some agents are very happy about because it means that after the job's done, they just have to negotiate for you.
Yeah.
But you can also go to entertainment lawyers or the like, where you just, if you don't know the industry, you want someone who does know the industry to look at it. And so, like I have friends in the industry at this point, so I have like the legal side who's willing to look at my stuff for me. And that's helped out. If I ever get to like a big advance, it may be worth just like, okay, I'm going to have an agent deal with it at this point. But sadly, the average advance for mid-list and lower authors has just been going down and down and down. And so you're like, yay, I get a few $1,000s versus, or I don't get anything, but I get high royalties.
Yeah, it depends. It's true. It depends like what you're looking for. If you're looking to just get your work out there, maybe it doesn't matter to you. If you're like, this is my livelihood, I spent 40 hours a week doing this for a year, I need to make something back, like I get it.
Yeah, and that's why all the different levels of publishing are there, and I do highly caution anyone listening against vanity presses, sometimes called hybrid presses, where it's we're a publisher, but really you should pay us to put your books out. Like that tends to be the worst of all worlds, because you're giving up the right to completely control your work like self-publishing, but you're still paying all the money you would to self-publish anyway. But all the different levels of traditional publishing or just self-publishing, I feel like, are completely valid. You want to do your legwork to make sure you're in business with someone who knows what they're doing. But if your goal is you have a neo-noir zombie detective novel that you just feel so passionately about and just want to share this with the world, and you find a niche little publisher that can't offer you much but does a great job with their little niche, yeah, go for it. Like, the bigger publishers generally are much more cautious about these, I don't know what your market is sort of books. And so that's
Yeah.
entirely legitimate if that's what your goal is.
Yeah. All right. Couple questions here to wrap it up. What are your writing habits like? And how long does it take you to finish a novel?
I'm really lucky that I'm one of those people who can sit on a train or at a bar and scribble on a piece of paper and write. So I'm not someone who's like, okay, I need to go into my writer cave with my specific bug and do this and this and this for my writing. I'm sorry, my brain just turned off. What was the end of that? So,
and how long does it take you to finish a novel?
oh yes, and then to finish, as I said, these days I tend to be an underwriter, as some people call it, where you sort of put down a very short first draft and then have to build it out from there. And so I can, if I'm really pushing myself, do a first draft in a month. Generally, it's more like 4 or 5 months, depending on what else I'm doing, of course. And then edits can take just round and round and round. And so, I mean, even between selling my next book that's coming out called Forever Bound, and actually finishing edits with my editor. So after several rounds of edits with me, we went back and forth another like 4 or 5 times. And so edits can just like, between starting a book and having it published, it can be 4 years. Like it can be a really long time, but just getting a first draft down at this point, I may like, okay, spit it all out. If I don't know what something is, I'll put something in brackets and be like, description here, or they get, they find the MacGuffin or whatever else I need, and then I just keep going. So my first drafts tend to be relatively quick.
Cool. Well, anything else you want to say before we finish up here?
No, just thank you for having me. I always enjoy having a chance to talk about books.
Yeah, of course. You're welcome. And maybe we'll have you on again sometime. Thank you.
Oh yeah, just let me know.
All right. Bye.